Okay, I'm trying to get the PowerPoint pulled up here this morning, and it's good to be here. Like I said, I represent the Southeast region of the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. And what I plan to do this morning is spend a little bit of time and go into the development of the cohesive strategy. And then tomorrow, we'll actually talk about how we can utilize the conservation districts to help us with actually implementing cohesive strategy on the ground. So can you see my slides okay, Ann?
Yes, I can. Looks good.
Hey, all right. Well, good morning again, everybody. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief history about the cohesive wildland fire management strategy, and not spend too much time in some of the rundowns of the timeline, but it came out of the 2009 FLAME Act. FLAME, an acronym for Federal Land Assistance Management and Enhancement Act. And that act required the secretaries of the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior to come together and address some concerns that were brought out of several reports from the Government Accountability Office. And that's where, they looked at and said, we've got to do something to get a check on this, because wildfire costs were just, climbing and getting more and more each year, more costly, wildfires more deadly, more destructive. So they knew that, they had to address that situation, and realized early on, that wildfire knows no boundaries. It doesn't stop at property lines. It doesn't stop at jurisdictional boundaries. And so they brought in a very broad group and formed the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. That was, in 2011. They also formed regional strategy committees, which is what I represent. But when they looked at WIFLC, knowing that fire doesn't know any boundaries, they brought a broad group of folks from a lot of different federal agencies in there. I think there's somewhere around 13 different federal agencies that are represented, along with representation of state organizations, local, city, county government stuff, as well as tribal and other non-governmental organizations. So they realized there were three goals that they could address that would actually help them solve some of this issue with wildland fire. And all of this was rooted and based around science and research. And they came up with the three broad goals of cohesive strategy of restoring and maintaining resilient landscapes, creating fire adapted communities, so that human populations will be able to live with fire, because it's not necessarily a matter of if it's going to occur, but when and where and to what extent. And then also responding to wildfires in a safe and effective, efficient management area based on good management decisions. So the broad vision for the cohesive strategy was to safely and effectively extinguish fire when needed, use fire where allowable, manage our natural resources, and as a nation to live with wildland fire. And of course, it's an all hands, all lands approach, knowing that it takes everybody to make, things work with the wildland fire to get them in check. A little bit about the organization. We talked about how WIFLC is formed. Realizing that there are geographic differences in how wildfire occurs and responds, they organized three regions. These three regions just happen to also kind of coincide with the regional breakouts of the National Association of State Foresters. And there are two other regional coordinators like myself, and we interact quite a bit. We also, WIFLC has an executive manager that the three regions work with very closely. And WIFLC usually meets quarterly. The regional strategy committees usually meet monthly. And like I said, we interact and help one another and talk quite a bit. So when we look at our regional strategy committee, this is just a broad group of, varying different organizations. We actually represent over 40 or reach out to over 40 different organizations, stakeholders, at all levels, from local, state, federal, and try to have tribal input as well in what goes on. So early on, after WIFLC formed, they developed these 3 regional strategy committees. And, one thing I'll point out here is, we've got Department of Defense that has joined in with us on our strategy committee. And we all know in the Southeast what a broad presence Department of Defense has across our region. And they're also at the table at the WIFLC level. And so we've been able to get some good information and hopefully some additional technology use out of that in the future. But a very broad-based group of folks. We also have a technical group of people. They don't necessarily get a vote at the table, but if we've got a special project and we need expertise, we reach down to the folks in that technical group to help support our work groups and our regional strategy committee. And, realizing that fire is different in our region, it was great that when they built the cohesive strategy, it took a top down and bottom up approach. They realized quickly that, one size is not going to fit all when it comes to trying to resolve the wildfire problems across the country, because of those geographic differences, changes in fuel types, terrain, topography, ownership, etc. So like I said, a lot of science went into this. That graphic a while ago showed that all 3 of those goals were intertwined and linked around science, and a lot of data. Data has become the new 4-letter word, I say, quite often. But this formed our Southeast Regional Risk Analysis Report, which was the phase 3 of the process. And it looked at ways that we could identify what our regional risks were for wildfire, what our alternatives were, as far as actions that we could do to carry out to actually try to lessen the impacts of wildland fire across the Southeast. So they did a lot of polls, a lot of surveys, and input actually from over 160 agencies, organizations, and groups. And so that goes back to prove that it was, looking at all hands, looking at all lands, trying to get feedback on how we could address the situation. So when they got all that information and data, one thing they realized and identified is that there were 5 broad key values of importance in the South. And these are listed here: firefighter public safety, marketable products. We're the wood basket of the world, so we need to maintain a good supply of wood products. Such a diverse ecosystem group across the landscape in the Southeast, so ecological services. Definitely, understanding the cultural values around fire in the Southeast, and then protecting that property value. And so looking at those 5 key values, it actually helped develop a 153 item regional action plan. And that regional action plan is built around those 5 values. It identified some cross value actions where one of those items would actually cover more than one type part of the goals of cohesive strategy, which gave us the most and greatest impact in the Southeast. Of course, you always identify barriers. You try to identify what you can do to have critical success over those barriers, and then identified some strategic opportunities. And y'all get to see a few of these tomorrow when we talk about how we can apply it in the Southeast. WIFLC establishes priorities currently. They met just a month or so ago, and the priorities that they had listed are shown here. Of course, our regional strategy committee will try to, always implement and support the work that WIFLC is wanting us to do. And, one of the big ones that's come about of late is this, smoke management and air quality, and a lot of work that's been going on between WIFLC U.S. Forest Service, EPA, CDC, National Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils, et cetera, to try to help, just hopefully solve some of the myths around prescribed fire smoke, wildfire smoke.
And Gary, I might chime in on that last slide where you're talking about the America Burning Wildland Urban Interface report. I think is due out in June. And I'm happy to say, the contractor in charge of that is Jim Carroll's retired state forester from Florida State Forest Service. So there's definitely a Southern component in that report, as well as several of these other things that Gary's talking about. Thanks for
that's a good point, Ann. And on that America Burning WUI, most of us on here can go back and think about in the 70s when America Burning came out. It was directed by Congress to do a study because of so much loss of life and property in the residential side of things. And a lot of good things came out of that. That actually is what formed the United States Fire Administration. And this is a new approach. And our Regional Strategy Committee played a very vital role in gathering information from the survey that was put together to help write this report. And we collected information from the 13 southern states in the region, as well as a broad base of stakeholders, partners, et cetera, that are impacted on that wildland urban interface where houses, and human populations intertwine and mix with wildland fuels, et cetera. And a little cat out of the bag, I think they're supposed to be announcing it, but I think Jim Carles has been announced as the new fire director for National Association of State Foresters. But don't say Gary said that.
No, I appreciate that information, Gary. I really am excited about that report. I've been working with Jim behind the scenes since November, December, I think last year, with making sure that, that what conservation districts are doing across the country in communities and that local relationship with landowners has to get into that new updated WUI report. I think it's really critical that we recognize the work that's done by conservation districts.
Yeah, very much so, because that impact goes all the way down, to that individual homeowner when you start looking at those urban interface fires. A couple of the things, going back to the WIFLC priorities as well, climate and climate change and the impacts of it is also at the forefront of discussion. I'm sure that as more people get into place in their positions with the new administration, that we'll probably see some more of those priorities come out that focus primarily around some of the climate work that they're trying to do to lessen the impacts. So yeah, our Regional Strategy Committee supports WIFLC, carries out those priorities. We also develop priorities that we know are issues right here locally within our region. Our Regional Strategy Committee, we had a meeting back last March of 2019, had plans for a lot of good stuff to move forward, and then COVID hit. So we got kicked into neutral a little bit, but we're still plugging along. Oftentimes it's like trying to eat a mountain of ice cream with a baby spoon, but we keep knocking away at it the best we can. But our priorities, one of the main ones is focusing on this increased priority of prescribed fire upon the landscape, improving our capacity. And then of course, like we talked about, the FireAdapted communities approach. We don't have the large land bases of federal land ownership. It's all mostly privately owned land in the Southeast. We have such a fragmented landscape from development that continues to impact us. And so trying to reduce that risk at those community levels is very important. And then of course, one of the things that we've heard this morning in the NACD work is the outreach and communication, sharing of information and educating others. So taking a look at what those priorities were, we just established some individual work groups. That way we kind of shared the fun around of trying to implement and use the folks with the best expertise that can help us. in guiding and working around these goals. We do the same thing with the WIFLET goals, but these are the 4 work groups that we've got established. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of those now as we move forward. We talked about, you know, the importance of the fire adapted communities and community risk reduction work. There are 3 national mitigation initiatives: the FireWise Communities USA program, the Fire Adapted Communities program, and the Ready, Set, Go program. And they all really work hand in hand at trying to reduce the amount of impact of wildfire in the communities and to the homeowners. And so we support and try to work in outreach and education efforts, supporting these national mitigation programs, and you'll hear more about those later on as we move through the schedule from some of the stuff that Frank Riley's doing, and also Megan within it within FPA that represents the FireWise Communities USA program. One of the things that our group did was we established a committee and looked at a national fire adapted communities guide. This was a national guide. The majority of the pictures in it were of stuff in Colorado, California, Idaho, you know, and I learned from my work with the North Carolina Forest Service, where I retired after 31 years there and did over 12 years worth of mitigation work, that it's hard to sell folks on a program when you show them pictures of stuff that don't look like where they live. And so we took this national guide, got permission, and we went in and adapted this guide so that when somebody opened it and got to looking, they saw pictures that looked like stuff in Alabama or stuff in Georgia or Florida. It didn't look like stuff out west, so they could better associate with it. And so that was a big push that we did that's worked out and paid off well for us. Back in the fall of 2016, we know what a major outbreak of wildfires we had across the Southeast. And we formed a fire prevention education work group with our strategy committee to look at how to develop a guide for the use of fire prevention education teams in the Southeast. Fire prevention education teams are groups of trained individuals that can come in and help take some of the impact off of the local folks that are trying to prevent fires when they're having a big outbreak of fires. And so we had an FPET that came together here in the Southeast, and man, they did a great job. They really formed some great products. These are 2 of them. They were having a large arson problem up in the Appalachians. And so working with the local, state, and federal folks, they put together this nice poster about sniffing out arson. And they actually got some tips, made several arrests on arson fires, and it also kind of slowed down those ignitions from the arsonist. And it was right at Thanksgiving, and so everybody was wanting to fry turkey, so they did out the thing about safety there. But we're really going to pick back up and move forward on the work that this group is trying to do, you know, across the region. We talked about prescribed fire being so important to us here in the region. And, you know, this work group has a big lift. We just recently completed working with a collaborative of partners to develop an infographic series on why we prescribe burn and then how we conduct prescribed burns. You know, this is a good tool. They actually developed a bunch of social media slices that can be pulled from it and shared out and used in social media campaigns. We currently are looking and doing a regional prescribed fire training survey for fire training needs. We had 955 responses. I think Gary sent this survey out to a lot of folks across the region, and we appreciate that. The Northeast did a survey. Talking with my counterpart up there, we knew we might want to coattail what they did. We used the same questions they had, plus we built a bunch of other questions into it specific to our region. And so we're going through that. We've got some regional strategy committee folks working on the Southeast Fire Map, which is getting funding from NRCS. Thank you for that. that allow us to track where people are burning so we can see what's being done across the landscape. And then a project with the Florida Prescribed Fire Burn Planner that's got U.S. Forest Service funded through a grant that both of these will, I know the Florida one will eventually go southwide, and the Southeast Fire Met will hopefully eventually go nationally. But a lot of work, out of this group. Our communication and outreach efforts, we really push to try to do that. This is our webpage for the Southeast. We've got to do a better job on this. I lost my person that was helping me keep this up to date and moving. And, I get technologically challenged and have more days where I feel like, Fred Flintstone in the George Jetson world. So I'm not the one that can go in and be a web page designer or manager. So I'm hopefully picking that up with somebody we've got on a short chain to help us get that done. But a lot of information on here, a lot of information on success stories about things that have been done locally across the region that I think you would benefit from looking at. And, that's pretty much the cohesive strategy in a nutshell of what it is. We'll talk tomorrow more about fire here in the Southeast. We'll talk about how the conservation districts can help us with implementing cohesive strategy at the local level, because y'all are the people that live and work in those communities. And the public oftentimes is more receptive to somebody that they see on a regular basis, more so than somebody in a government uniform coming in to talk to them. So I'll be glad to entertain any questions. I think we've got just a couple of minutes, Ann, or anything you want to input. I'll kick it back to you and any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary. That was really good and very informative. I've worked with the Wildland Fire Leadership Council for many years, and so definitely have a broad scope, not just the West, and you can see that in their priorities. But it is really nice to have the Southern priorities take precedence in how you pulled those together. Any questions from folks? All right. Not hearing any, not seeing any. I look forward to your presentation tomorrow, Gary. Thank you so much.